Lots of chat about Reform UK and so much chat over the last few weeks and months about whether Nigel Farage will stand. We finally got the answer, didn't we, yesterday?
And he won't be standing. There was a lot of speculation, as you said, as to whether he would be one of those candidates. They promised to put forward a candidate in every seat. It looks like they're going to have 630 candidates going for 650 seats, so nearly one for every seat. But Nigel Farage addressed the speculation with a statement. He said he was actually going to step back and focus on the US campaign and Donald Trump's run to the White House. He did say he'd also still be helping the charge for reform and campaigning. But of course, as we said, that doesn't mean that he won't be on the front lines. And Lee Anderson actually spoke to Times Radio and said that loads and loads of MPs are going to be panicking about the presence of reform, because that was the question of how much they can really prove to be disruptors. He's quite confident that they can be disruptors. In fact, he told Times Radio yesterday that he's quite confident that his politics are going to resonate with voters, perhaps more than people might anticipate they will do.
I've got a big point to prove. I've got not an axe to grind as such, but I want to be proven right. I made comments about Khan. I've made comments about illegal migration, illegal migration. People say over the past four and a half years that I've been controversial in my views. I don't think I've been controversial. I think I'm saying what a lot of people are thinking, but daren't say. So, it's key for me to win my seat. I want to be proved right on what I've said and what I've done. And if I do that, I will rest easy.
So that's Lee Anderson, of course, the Reform Member of Parliament. And something that was quite interesting on Twitter yesterday, actually, was a sign that the Conservatives are starting to feel a little bit concerned about their presence and how much of a disruption they can make. They took a series of images from Scooby-Doo when the gang unmasked a baddie, and they said, let's find out who the baddie really is. They rip off the mask of Reform and it reveals Keir Starmer's face. And the message was saying, if you vote for Reform, you're essentially just giving a vote to Keir Starmer. Make sure you don't vote for them. It's interesting to see that they are starting to feel perhaps a tiny bit of the pressure that Reform will have and will continue to push for the next 6 weeks as we head towards a general election.
The picture of making time for a change is very, very powerful. After 14 years of a Conservative administration, people are getting rather tired of the same old faces in some respects, but also the turmoil that we've seen with 3 prime ministers in the last few years. So it looks to me as though the people are, and the polls substantiate this, keen to see an opportunity given elsewhere, because people just get tired of the administration. Having said that, I think the polls are going to close a little bit when we get closer to the election date itself, because a lot of people just haven't made up their minds. And unlike Henry and yourself and everybody else at Times Radio, they're not looking at politics day by day in the sort of frenzied way that we do.
And therefore, Henry, that gives Rishi Sunak the opportunity to sort of craft his message over the next 6 weeks to people who've maybe sort of checked out politically, who now realise something's on the way. How strong do you think the Prime Minister's message is to say, look, the economy's on track, we are getting a handle of migration figures, NHS waiting lists? Do you think the public will be convinced from what you've seen so far?
Well, it's one of the weird things about the timing of the election, because, having inflation coming down is good, but that takes time to translate into things that voters care about. Every month he waited, that would have been, think, about 100,000 people or households who renegotiated their mortgages and benefited from that lower rate. Going purely on the basis of the headline rate is very strange timing. Now, a lot of things could happen in the election campaign. The fact that it's caught us all by surprise, Labour, I think the expectation was that as we got ready for a November election, more focus would shift to Labour and the relative lack of sort of big picture policy thinking from them. So, maybe some of those voters who haven't made up their minds will go to Rishi Sunak. But the problem for the Prime Minister is that the Conservatives have been in office for 14 years. He's been in office for over a year. He's a known quantity. He is a known quantity. And whilst Starmer might not be the most popular leader of the opposition that we've ever had, it's easier to see people breaking for change because we haven't had what everyone was expecting: another fiscal event, another series of giveaways and offers, that kind of thing that might have given a wavering voter who's maybe tired of the Tories but wary of Starmer a positive reason to vote Conservative.
How do you feel about how listeners are responding? I mean, clearly it is not a huge poll, a commissioned poll, but the number of messages that we're getting, the overwhelming majority are sceptical, are left wanting more from Sir Keir Starmer in terms of detail. I appreciate we're only on day 2, but is this a strong start for the Labour leader?
Well, the polls show increasingly a very big lead for the Labour Party, and that certainly Labour mustn't be complacent and isn't complacent. And people have said that Keir Starmer is boring, not exciting, and that's probably reflected in what your listeners are now saying. But what he's actually doing is setting out Labour's stall, not promising things that can't be delivered, and talking about a programme for a parliament. And in fact, he's talking about a decade of renewal. And we're at the beginning of a 6-week campaign when a lot more detail will come out. But I think that the solid issues that are being presented by Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, things that will be done, dealing with problems, waiting lists in the NHS, providing more teachers, looking at more security, and more neighbourhood policing, more economic stability, and a publicly owned energy company to address the massive energy issues we've got, are really very, very important things. And they might not be exciting in the sense that people think they've not heard of any of this before. But I think they really matter. And I think over the coming weeks, the details will be filled out. And they're all very basic things that people want after all these years of a Conservative government, 14 years, where people feel worse off, are worse off, and feel they've no hope with the current government. So I think that Labour's doing okay, but there's another 6 weeks to go.
Yeah, indeed.
More detail has to come and more questions will come, I'm sure.
And we're hanging on in there. Angela, I'll come to you in a mo. Louise, I do just want to put to you, part of the core of the conversation that Sir Keir Starmer had with Chloe was around the economy, which is clearly of huge importance, in fact, the most significant thing for voters, according to polling. Now, I just wonder for how long Sir Keir Starmer can point to the disruption of the last couple of years when, in fact, things are stabilising. Inflation is down. It's at 2.3%. When Rishi Sunak took over, it was in double digits, and we were still enduring, I suppose, the aftershocks of COVID. Today, the energy price cap has come down. People will notice that. Their energy bills will be impacted by that. And the economy is growing faster than anyone predicted, as Rishi Sunak, to use Rishi Sunak's words. It's outpacing Germany, France, and the US, he writes this morning. For how long can Sir Keir Starmer point to instability up against Rishi Sunak's message that actually he is delivering data that demonstrates an economy that is more under control?
Well, what Keir Starmer can do is point to how things are and how people actually feel. And people know that this is the result of 14 years of Tory rule. Whatever figures Rishi Sunak produces now, whatever predictions are made, they're words, aren't they? And their hopes, their aspirations. People know that they're in a worse position than they were before. They know that they've had 14 years of government and a series of prime ministers who haven't made things better, have made things worse. So to be told now it's going to be less bad in future is words, not really very satisfactory.
Okay.
And I think people do want change, but change that they can rely on, not change that's wild and dramatic and may not ever happen.
Angela, what do you make of that and the core arguments that we're hearing from Labour leader and Conservative leader on, albeit day 2 of the campaign?
Yes, and I think we'll be hearing a lot more. I only hope that, always to me, 6 weeks seems a very long time in the campaign. And if it goes on like it started, I think the tendency could be to turn more people off rather than anything else. Let's pick up your economy point. Have we had a real problem in this country? And the answer is yes. We were hit very badly as a consequence of the Ukraine war. We were hit very badly as a consequence of all the things that were happened first with COVID, the lockdown, the borrowing of the money in order to pay for us to be at home, and so on. And we're not alone in that. Unfortunately, it is something that hopefully will not happen again for another 50, 100 years. But coming through those consequences is not easy. You can't expect to have a wonderful, booming economy when there's been so much of those issues. We have the same problem as other European countries, and we're steadily coming through it. And yeah, you can say, well, the people in charge were the Conservatives. That's right. The Conservatives did not create the pandemic. Conservatives did not create the war, and the Conservatives did not create the consequences that came for those two things. And so it's perfectly fair to say it's been difficult. It's perfectly fair to say the economy is now recovering. What I do hope is that both sides don't start pointing at each other and saying, these world things are your fault. They're not. And dealing with a problem is a very hard thing to do. Looking ahead, yes, if you look at any of the economic data, it's starting to look pretty good. We're going to be steadily, not fantastically, but steadily improving. And actually dealing with a steadily improving, steadily recovering economy, better incomes for people, more opportunities for young. Actually, that is a very good scene to be picture to have.
Okay.
But you are right. It doesn't, it's not fireworks. It's not startling, but it is good, solid stuff. And that is something that does need to be said time and time again.